Good morning, everybody, and what a joy it is to be with you. Wasn't the president great? Let's give a round of applause to our President of the United States, Joe Biden. I want to thank you all for being here in Los Angeles as we host the Summit of the Americas. And as we dig into one of the most important focuses of not only the CEO Summit, but of course the summit itself, our civil sector discussions, our cities discussions, which is about the greening of our future. And you're here in Los Angeles, where if we were doing this some 80 years ago, during World War II, our smog was so bad that people thought it was a chemical attack by the Japanese. In the 1950s, we lost a 10-year-old girl in one of our smog attacks that we had here every single day because of the industry and the pollution that was here. When I was growing up as a child, we would have stage 3 smog alerts where we literally couldn't go outside and play, where 100% of our energy came from coal and dirty sources. Today, you're meeting in a city where we've cleaned up 90% of the smog that existed when I was a child, where civic activists and government and CEOs of businesses came together to create a greener future. A place where when I started my time as an elected official 2 decades ago, just 2% of our power owned by our municipal utility was renewable. Today that stands at 62% carbon-free, on the way to what we're calling LA 100, which will be 100% renewable power by the end of this decade. We can do big things together in this hemisphere. And it was just a few months ago in Glasgow where we had Secretary Kerry leading our American delegation, where I stood on that same stage on behalf of 1,049 cities, pledging to get to zero carbon, the equivalent of the 4th to 5th largest emitter in the world. And we saw cities stepping up, 2/3 of them ahead of schedule, to inspire action that our national governments, too, continue to move towards pledging. But it's also fueled by our private sector and all of you who are coming up with the innovation that we want to display here today. So I'm your moderator. We have an amazing panel here, and I want to thank each and every one of them. Of course, John Kerry, who has served this country and this world so admirably, who has done such amazing work on behalf of all of us as the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. Kara Hurst, old classmate of mine, we went to school together way back, we just reconnected on, and who's Vice President of Worldwide Sustainability at Amazon, one of the companies doing the deepest and most catalytic work in this space to help not just the bottom line of Amazon, but the bottom line of the health of this planet. And Ernesto Torres Cantu, who's the CEO of Citi Latin America, who's helping us on the finance side to make sure that all of our dreams aren't just abstract dreams, but ones that we can actually put capital behind and realize each day. So let's get to the discussion. Let me start with you, of course, Special Envoy Kerry. Tell us a little about, you've been traveling the world, and you not only a Secretary of State, but now a Special Envoy. And oftentimes, there are countries in the Americas doing a lot, but we haven't talked about an America's strategy, a hemispheric strategy to link us together on all the work that we are doing to address climate change and to produce green jobs. Tell us a little bit about your ideas from this summit of what we might be able to produce in terms of a hemispheric strategy.
Well, Eric, let me begin by thanking you and paying homage to the extraordinary efforts that the city of Los Angeles has been making, and California as a whole. California has been obviously a trendsetter. Everybody knows it's 5th or 6th largest economy in the world, and when it does something, it has an impact on every other state. Let me begin by saying that every country I'm visiting is more seized of this issue than we are yet in the United States, regrettably. And I say that really sadly. President Biden is seized of the issue, and he has made major commitments and is moving us towards a 2035 carbon-free power sector, or 2035 only electric cars, and other changes that are taking place. The problem is that no place in the world right now is moving fast enough. The IEA tells us that we need to be deploying renewables 5 or 6 times faster than we are to keep the 1.5 degrees. They also warn us that we have to be transitioning out of the worst of the fossil fuel pollutants, which is mainly coal, about 6 times faster than we are. and deploying electric vehicles probably 22 times faster. Folks, that's to achieve sustaining the world's warming at 1.5 degrees. And every tenth of a degree after that, you have to just look at the science. There is nothing that President Biden is doing or you're doing or I'm doing that is predicated on ideology or politics, right, left, middle, anything. It is driven by biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics. And it is predictable and has been predicted for 35 years. So suddenly we do have countries that are mobilizing. I just came from an event with a group of nations which have signed on to marine protected areas, but also all of whom are joining up with renewable energy for Latin America and the Caribbean, taking initiatives on their own. There are leaders up and down the hemisphere, and it's exciting to see what they're doing. I see Ken Salazar, former senator and our ambassador to Mexico now, and I've been down there 3 times and going down Monday again to meet with President Lopez Obrador, who is embracing a transition, and we're going to try and work together to make some announcements. But you look at a place like Mexico where you have unbelievable geothermal that has not been tapped. You have hydro. You have unbelievable wind and sun, particularly in the southern part, on Pacific, on the Gulf, all of which are just extraordinary opportunities. We calculate there may be as much as 4,000 gigawatts of potential power you could tap into. And that's capable of obviously being sent longer distance today because of technology. So Colombia, Ecuador, Argentina, Costa Rica, Panama, I've left out, but Chile, Peru, all of these countries are moving now, and their greatest restraint is finance and technology. So there's much we can do. We're working in my office right now with India in a partnership, with South Africa, with Indonesia, with Vietnam, Mexico, because those countries were not yet able in Glasgow to be able to say, we're going to hit the 1.5. Here's our plan. With the finance and technology, they could hit that plan. And what we want to do is sort of handhold them through this transitional process to be able to show them that we can de-risk these deals. We can produce bankable deals. We can blend finance using charity to some degree to leverage, get perhaps even sovereign guarantees in certain places. But you just heard the president say there's really a limitless set of possibilities for how we could be responding, particularly if we had unanimity, which we don't have. We're very polarized, obviously, in America, and too much so on this issue. The possibility, this is the largest market the world has ever been staring at, the energy transition market. Every aspect of life can be affected in a positive way. It's not something to fear that we have to sort of shun and shy away from. We have to embrace this transition, which will, in the end, I guarantee you, be larger ultimately than the Industrial Revolution was. And I know to a certainty, because I've been watching closely what MIT is doing, what Stanford is doing, what our laboratories are doing. I was in California recently, again, here in California recently, and I went to Google X and watched what they're doing with direct air carbon capture. Met with about 15 startups that are doing unbelievable, not yet scaled, but scalable things that will change battery storage, green hydrogen, electrolyzers, maybe create a product out of the carbon, which I'm confident we will be doing at some point. So these are the things, and every aspect of the food chain of economy, you know, plumbers, pipe fitters, carpenters, electricians, heavy equipment operators, designers, architects, engineers, up and down the scale, as we begin to put AI into the mix of balancing energy as we send it around the country, as we build a legitimate grid, a smart grid that you can begin to manage better. I mean, we can do this. We could do a whole bunch of it right now, except for our politics.
Let me ask you one thing before I turn to Kara. What could our unique lane be as a hemisphere? Or are we just joining, you know, world effort inspiring us? Is there something about the Western Hemisphere or hemispheric strategy beyond the link that you just signed with the coastal connection in the Pacific that could really define what hemispheric leadership looks like?
Growth capacity. And what the president was talking about in terms of democracies, many of them functioning more effectively than we are here in America, regrettably. But they are functioning, and I think that we have a huge ability to meld the talent of this hemisphere, the demand of this hemisphere. And if you just, as I mentioned, take Mexico, what Mexico could be doing in terms of supplying energy north and south, cheap. We could provide much cheaper energy to our citizens. We could be dealing with some of the challenges of food production, of building materials. We have this remarkable set of resources. And I really do see an endless set of possibilities. I think we're only just awakening to it. But I talked to President Duque in Colombia, or to a host of younger new presidents who've come in various countries. They're ready to go. This is a really exciting moment for this hemisphere. And I think the will is there now. We have people sort of thirsty and hungry. Tell you what's missing. What's missing is a full-fledged private sector commitment to embrace this. Our enemy right now, I say this politely, is the status quo. We're fighting against people who still want to choose the path of least resistance to this challenge. And it happens, unfortunately, be the path of greatest destruction. We spent $265 billion just cleaning up after 3 storms a couple of years ago. Every scientist who has been doing this for 35, 40 years, part of the IPCC, will tell you that we can get to a low carbon, no carbon economy. The question is, will we get there in time? And remember that the IPCC warned us that we had 12 years, 4 years ago, to make the decisions that would avoid the worst consequences of the crisis. They didn't say to avoid the crisis, the worst consequences. That's what we're stuck with. We already have baked in enough greenhouse gases that even if we got to net zero by 2050, we have to figure out how we're going to suck out of the atmosphere another 1.6 trillion tons of carbon. And what do we do with it? Well, yes, it's a challenge, but it's also an incredible opportunity. And I can't think of a hemisphere where we are as capable of integration. I did a lot of work in the Middle East, a lot of work in the Horn of Africa and South Central Asia. And I look at that area and I say, they're so far from the kind of integration capacity that we have. I mean, they're still trying to figure out the basics of can they get along. The closest they've come is the Abraham Accord, which bring a few countries together. It's the least integrated part of the world. Europe is a more mature economy, more regulation. So we're looking at a place where we have less regulation, less maturity of the economy, much greater economic opportunity. And I believe that if we seize this opportunity, people are going to be stunned. 2 years ago, fastest growing job in America, in the United States, was wind turbine technician. Third fastest growing job in America was solar panel installer. Jobs, folks, higher paying, well, important, good jobs. And we haven't begun yet to build out the grids necessary to transport this clean energy that will be there. And in the building of that, there's an extraordinary set of opportunities. One of the things we all have to work on together, folks, is we can't take if the science is correct, and I don't think you can be half pregnant on this, if you accept that it's happening, and you accept the science of why it's happening, then I think you have an obligation as a public servant implementing the precautionary principle of governance. You have an obligation to say, if they're telling us this will be the damage, we need to take steps to avoid that damage. And that's what they're doing. And so far, they've been correct, beyond correct. The damage has come faster and it's coming bigger. And if you look at what's happening in the Antarctic and the Arctic, these are the 2 tipping points that scientists fear the most. Because you are not talking about centimeters or inches or even a few feet of sea level rise. You are talking about meters. And the scientists are now telling us what was predicted to happen by the end of the century with respect to oceans is now going to happen within the next 30 years. So that's our challenge. And, you know, I look back at World War II. There's a great book by Paul Kennedy at Yale who wrote a book called The Engineers of Victory. And it's just a small paperback, and you could read it fast. But let me tell you, the story of mid-level decision-making that took place to make it certain we could win a war is extraordinary. And at one point towards the end of the war, we were turning out one B-50, one B-24 bomber every hour on the hour out of a former car plant in Michigan. That's what we can do. And that's what the president's talking about when he tries to say we have to accelerate the manufacture of solar and wind, because here's the key point I'd like to make. If you don't deploy enough of the technologies we have today, even as we're waiting for new ones to come online, you cannot achieve net zero by 2050. You have to do enough between 2020 and 2030 to keep alive the possibility of net zero by 2050. And that only happens if we accelerate in the ways in which scientists and the IEA and others are telling us we must do.
Well, if I can reflect everybody's feelings after hearing that, it's probably a word I've made up that I call excitement. It's a lot of anxiety and a lot of excitement at the same time. Tremendous opportunities, a wonderful vision, and obviously the storm clouds over us.
Can I make one last comment?
Yeah, sure,
Really, 30 seconds. This won't happen without you, folks. There's no way, no government in the world has enough money to be able to implement this transition. It only happens if we excite the private sector, and the private sector takes a lead, really, in producing the products and the technologies that we need, the processes we need. I'm convinced that can happen. I've never seen in Glasgow, in all the COPs, we've never had so much private sector engagement. I think with ESG and the Sustainable Development Goals and other things, every boardroom in the world is now talking about how do we get there, sustainability officers, so forth. We can win this battle, no doubt. But we've got to pick up the pace.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Secretary. And it's a perfect segue to you, Kara. Yeah, please. So, Kara, you work at a company named after the world's green lungs, Amazon, in this hemisphere, and a company that really has taken that leadership, launched the Climate Pledge boldly in 2019, which you co-founded, and now it has over 300 signatories.
That's right.
So, jumping off of what Secretary Kerry mentioned, give us a sense of your urgency, and then when you look at an operation as complicated, both in direct power that Amazon has over your operations and the indirect power of all the enterprises you touch, of how that urgency can be achieved with private sector leadership.
Yes, well, thank you for having us on this panel, and Secretary Kerry, always such incredibly inspiring remarks. And I think it's kind of a perfect lead-in the sense that we're all looking at the science. We're all looking at the IPCC reporting and how it's evolved over the last few years. And we see that in our own communities around the world, that the devastating effects of climate change are happening more frequently, as President Biden mentioned as well, and in more devastating ways. And so there is the aspect of anxiety around climate change and what can we do. But the opportunity in front of us is absolutely incredible and exciting. And I think what we've taken on at Amazon, when we looked at that science and we looked at what we could do and how we could bring our scale and our speed and leverage that for good, we thought about, I would say, in three different aspects. One is that we set out to make a very bold commitment to be net zero carbon by 2040. Which on our scale and with all of our operations, accelerating up the Paris Agreement commitment by 10 years, we said we want to figure out how to do this. We don't know all of how we will do that. We know that there are technologies that need to be invented, but we need to get started today, yesterday, on decarbonizing our own operations first and foremost. And we want to share everything we know about how we look at that through many hard-to-abate sectors like transportation and the built environment and steel and cement and so forth, and think about sharing those solutions very quickly. So we're working first and foremost in our own company to decarbonize and then to share what we know. And we created the Climate Pledge with global optimism led by Christiana Figueres, who is the architect of the Paris Agreement. And we made that a pledge because we wanted to invite in other companies, and we wanted to share what we were learning and seeing and learn from others. So we have now 300 companies over the past couple of years who have committed, and that's $3.1 trillion in revenue. It's across 50 different industries in 29 different countries, and they employ over 8 million people. So when you talk about the momentum of the private sector, it's happening. And we need this to be pre-competitive collaboration where none of us are going to win at this unless the planet wins. And we need healthy communities for where we all live, work, and operate. We're also taking that and we're investing. We created a climate pledge fund. It's a $2 billion fund. We're investing in early stage decarbonizing technologies across things like regenerative agriculture, direct air capture technologies. We've invested in zero carbon aviation, which is a big bet going forward. We've looked at technological solutions to monitor deforestation like Pachama. So we're looking at all of those technologies and then thinking about how do we fund and accelerate investment in them and share what we're learning. And then, of course, this piece of the economic growth that comes with some of this investment, the upskilling to meet the demand for the jobs that we will need to meet in this green economy, the economic growth that can come with sustainable development and investment. We're really proud to be part of the 100K Klima new venture that President Biden mentioned, where we're investing in training people for jobs of the future, photovoltaic installation, wind turbine repair, but also, development of these technologies and how they can be deployed. The transformation that we will need to see is absolutely a cross-sectoral partnership. So, for example, we thought when we launched the Climate Pledge, we just need to send big market demand signals. That's what the private sector can do. So we ordered 100,000 electric delivery vans from a company called Rivian. We've also ordered from Mercedes-Benz and Mahindra and a number of different OEMs. And then we need partnership from the public sector to transform the infrastructure for that electrification. So we think there's pieces of this the private sector can certainly bring forward, and then there's pieces government, cities, states, countries can bring forward to partner with that, and certainly the NGO sector as well. So this is everybody all in towards this very urgent goal. But when we send those market demand signals, we share what we know, we invest in early stage decarbonizing technologies, we invest in the upskilling, and we really inspire. We hope that many, many more companies will come along with us. We hope regions will come along with us. Cities are welcome to commit to the Climate Pledge and accelerate really our path and really pay attention to what the science is telling us. We no longer have time. We need to commit now, and we need to drive those solutions.
So I want to turn to Ernesto in a second, but let me follow up just briefly. If you could say 1, 2, 3 things that this summit would produce in terms of the leaders to help everywhere that you are in the hemisphere to achieve those goals, what would those things be?
Yeah, I think it's looking at what you have currently, what makes sense for your region. So first and foremost is it, investing in preservation of our natural environment. We need to really stop deforestation. We need to preserve our wetlands, peatlands, grasslands. We need to think about how we create, and preserve those carbon sinks.
The Amazon for the Amazon program.
Yeah, stopping tropical deforestation, preserving what we have, investing in, and making that economically viable for regions, very important. We also need to think about grids, and we need to think about how we're greening grids, how we're putting more renewables on the grid. At Amazon, we are the largest corporate purchaser in the world of renewable energy. So again, we're sending that demand signal, and we need more renewable energy on the grids where we operate around the world. So thinking about what that looks like. And then transformation of our built environment. The built environment is one of the sectors that drives one of the biggest carbon levers, really, that we could pull. And so thinking about new materials for that sector, how we build differently, how we retrofit, how we are more energy efficient in the buildings that we have. So thinking about where you can really pull, identify and pull those big carbon levers, or decarbonizing.
And as Secretary Kerry said, there's a lot of jobs in them there hills, by doing that work. I know as local, regional, or national governments, we can produce a lot of work in the short term. So Ernesto, let me turn to you, because all this requires money.
It does.
You're the money man, and as one of the world's largest financial institutions, I know that Citi has been having these conversations for a long time, has been a leader. I've been part of delegations in China before President Obama's first visit there that were discussing this with Citi and others. And I know that that your CEO, Jane Fraser, announced a commitment to reach net zero by 2050 in her first day in the role as your CEO. So how are you approaching the sustainable finance piece? And how has that commitment been developing? What sort of urgency, what sort of evolution has that had in the past year? What will this process look like for Citi?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And Secretary Kerry asked for the private sector full-fledged commitment. And Jane made that clear in her first day at the job, absolutely. And we do believe, net zero for 2050, that includes everything we do. In our operations, that will be by 2030. And more importantly, the 1 trillion commitment to finance, in sustainability and social financing by 2030 also. I think our responsibility goes farther than that in accompanying our clients, in which we have all the countries participating in the summit, in that transition. And President Biden referred to nearshoring, friendshoring, etc. That what companies are looking for, what they tell us in terms of energy is, of course, they want the quantity, the competitiveness in terms of price, but the quality, where it comes from, if it's clean or not, matters as much. Why? Because they need countries where they're going to be installed to help them reach their own goals, right? Now, in that sense, investing and having a clean energy in our countries represents a huge competitive advantage for that nearshoring and friendshoring, etc. The other point is, look, we're barely coming out of the pandemic in Latin America and the world. And as we all know, Latin America has 8% of the world's population, but had a little over a third of all the deaths caused by COVID. So the situation, the fiscal space that the different countries have is limited. I really liked President Biden's comment that we have to find the mechanisms to do both things and not make countries choose. And that goes in the way, Secretary Kerry alluded to that, of finding mechanisms, including in some cases guarantees, either by sovereigns or multilateral corporations, that help the different countries achieve their objectives. The conversations I have had with the different prime ministers, presidents in the last couple of days are incredibly encouraging. And what you hear is, investing in green hydrogen. Panama is carbon negative, for example. So you can see the willingness, absolutely, the willingness to do that. And I think we all have that responsibility to make it happen, Mayor.
Where do you have oversubscription, not enough money to give out to certain projects, and where do you wish you had more private sector projects that you could give more money to?
I think in general, look, that's what we do, right?
Right.
No? So lending money is what is at the core of our mandate, if you will, and mission. So what we ask for is more projects that are, ideally public-private, and that are advanced enough in terms of, the executive project that proves the business case. And we're working with most of the countries in Latin America to advance that, Mayor.
So it's really that public-private coming together, and the public finance side, which we hope will produce something from the Summit of America, is quite dramatic there, thanks to the good work of Secretary Kerry and others. would really, I think, leverage that and move that forward, both at the local and national levels as well. So,
Absolutely.
13 seconds. I'm going to give you at least 5 seconds back of your day. I want to thank Secretary John Kerry. I want to thank Kara Hurst. I want to thank Ernesto Torres Cantu. And I want to thank you. Many people decided when the president left they had to chase him. You stayed here because you care about this issue. You knew that we had superstars up here, and this was a superb session. Let us make sure that we don't just mark history, but that we make history at this summit. Thank you for helping us achieve that, and have a wonderful day. Muchísimas gracias.
Well done, Eric. Very good job.
Thank you.